Welcome, and thank you so much for being here for today's monthly Bridge lunch break. Today, as you all know, we are discussing the results of Michigan's 2022 general election, and this event is hosted by Bridge Michigan. My name is Amber DeLind. I'm the Membership and Engagement Director at Bridge. I'm also joined today by my colleague Josiah Foster, who is co-hosting the event with me. And I'm additionally joined by many members of our reporting team. Our capital reporting team will be talking with you today about what we know, what we don't yet, and what it all means. If you don't know, Bridge Michigan is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and to your community. Sorry, I heard some background noise. Just wanted to make sure that we were okay. Events like today's lunch break are made possible by the support of our member community. Bridge Club members are people who have donated to our nonprofit newsroom in the last year. We are in the midst of our year-end campaign, so if you would like to support Bridge today, we'll make sure that we drop a link in our chat so that you can do so. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by our capital reporting team who are collectively operating on about 5 hours of sleep. They will guide us through the results of Tuesday's general election, as well as what we still don't know and the implications for the state as a whole. Managing editor Joel Kurth will be moderating this discussion with our political reporters, Lauren Gibbons, Jonathan Oosting, and Stella. If you have questions for our reporters, please type those into the chat at any time today, but please stay muted. If you're not muted right now, please make sure you mute your microphone. If you are joining us by phone today, you can email questions at any time throughout the conversation to membership@bridgemi.com. The schedule for today's discussion is this. Joel will lead a discussion, sort of an opening discussion with Lauren, Jonathan, and Stella. And then we're really going to turn to your questions. We got a lot of great questions when folks registered for this event. So we'll try to get to as many of those as possible, as well as your questions in the chat. So feel free to drop those into the chat at any time. And then we'll conclude by 1 p.m. today. As you heard at the beginning, we are recording this discussion and we'll be posting the recording on Bridge's website, bridgemi.com this week. I'll now turn the conversation over to Joel. Take it away.
Hey, thank you so much, Amber. What's amazing is that we do have a lot to talk about this morning. I think we all thought that we may not have much to talk about or not know a lot of the results, but they're all in, and it was quite an amazing night for Democrats, not so much for Republicans and election deniers. I think let's start with Jonathan, and I wonder if you could just take us through the highlights of what we saw in Michigan, which I think was a historic night.
Yeah, that's right. There was a lot of talk, especially in Republican circles, about there being a red wave in Michigan, but there wasn't anything of that kind. Democrats, in fact, did really, really well. Whitmer, Governor Whitmer, it appears, votes are still being counted, but it appears she's going to end up with about a 10-point margin over GOP challenger Tudor Dixon, which would be even better than she did in 2018, which was a pretty big win at the time. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but because of legislative redistricting, there were a lot more competitive seats in the state House and the state Senate. And with Whitmer carrying the state by 10 percentage points, Democrats were able to do really well. A lot of folks thought they had a chance to flip the Senate, but only a very slim chance to flip the state House. They did both. Of course, all of the ballot proposals passed. I talked to a lot of voters yesterday who said Prop 3 in particular, the abortion rights issue, motivated them to vote. Democrats also ended up with a 1-seat majority in the congressional delegation. So all around, a historic night because Democrats haven't had full control, the trifecta in Lansing of the governor's office and legislature in about 4 decades. The state Senate in particular had been in Republican hands since 1984, but next year, Democrats will take over with a slim 2018 majority there. So pretty wild night. I mean, I didn't see it coming. A lot of folks I talked to didn't see it coming either on either side, that it was going to be this large of a margin.
For sure. It was really extraordinary to watch as well. I think one thing to note too is the Democrats not only have a trifecta, they have I think it's called a quinella in gambling circles as well. They also have the state Supreme Court. They have a one seat they hold on to a one seat majority there. And I think a lot of what drove it was higher than normal turnout. We saw some extraordinary scenes at MSU and U of M of students waiting to register to vote and vote until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm wondering if we can talk now to you, Stella, about what we think helped drive turnout and whether, for instance, the Proposal 3 abortion ballot measure played a big role in that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, I've talked to candidates, political consultants, and we've also talked to some voters. Many young voters, college students, right? They turn out for the first time, and they have told us that Prop 3 was the main reason why they're at the polling places, ready to cast a yes vote on Prop 3. So yeah, and consultants I've talked to have basically said the proposal actually did turn out people on both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, but judging from the votes that we were seeing trickling in last night, I mean, it's mostly Democrats. And so a Republican consultant I talked to actually said he had expected evangelicals and church groups to really mobilize Republican voters to vote no on Prop 3, but that didn't materialize as the night went on. In fact, I was just talking to Representative Julie Brixey, who lives in Okemos, and she was telling me how the abortion issue not only drove voter turnout that benefited Democrats, but also helped boost their fundraising for like basically throughout the entire election cycle. She said her own leadership funds had pulled in about 700,000 over the past 4 years, but like she was seeing the bulk of it really coming in after Roe fell. So obviously, Joel, you already mentioned the long lines in Ann Arbor and East Lansing. We're seeing at least a lot of college students turning out in person, lining up into the late night, trying to cast their ballot. And so I'd say that's really impressive. But I guess like until the final voting results come in, we're not sure whether that's higher than previous years, or maybe it's just, the college students decided it's better to vote in person rather than absentee. So.
Well, we all know college students, and many of us wait to the last minute to do everything. There's no fault in that. Jonathan, you mentioned that Whitmer is going to win by about 10 points, which would mean that she won by 1 point more than she did in 2018 against Bill Schuette. But obviously, as we've said, there's a considerable difference in the outcome of the legislature. And I'm wondering, Lauren, if we could talk about why that is and what we expect to see, not only for leadership among the Democrats, but what issues they may pursue in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we can't go without mentioning redistricting on this call. That's the main difference between 2018 and 2022 in terms of the path to majority and what the stakes were. Essentially, the Senate got momentum for 2022 only because the maps were a lot more favorable to them. Operating under the previous maps they had pretty much maxed out the number of districts that they were going to be able to make a play for. This changed the whole game. And so everyone was kind of watching the Senate. Then the House, I think a lot of analysts were looking at that saying, yeah, it's still like there's a path there technically, but it could definitely still go Republican if this is a favorable night for Republicans. They're still very competitive maps. It's not like one party would have necessarily a giant advantage, but it looked like Republicans were going to have a bit of an advantage in the House. And then, as Jonathan mentioned, we saw it, just especially, I think downriver is a really important one to mention for the state House districts, right? A lot of people were wondering if those seats were going to stay in Democratic control. And we saw a couple of key pickups by Democrats in Downriver keeping those seats, which was a big part of it. And yeah, we certainly, I would say, yeah, redistricting was a huge factor.
Terrific. Jonathan, we mentioned Gretchen Whitmer's victory. I'm wondering if there's anything you can discern from the results, areas of the state that she did particularly well in, and how much of a role is the Democrats' message, or is it a combination of that and the fact that this is a crop of Republican candidates that the likes of which we may have never seen?
Yeah, so Whitmer, her win is going to be probably a little bit larger than 2018, but it's going to sort of build on trends that started building in that election, right? We saw areas like Oakland County and Kent County break sharply to Democrats in 2018 for Whitmer, and again a little more in 2020. And it seems like Whitmer, again, not all votes are counted, but it seems like she's going to be building on her advantages. And those two real high population counties in particular, Kent and Oakland County, compared to what she had in 2018. Of course, she's always going to do, Democrats are always going to do well in Detroit, or historically have anyways. The question there was what voter turnout was going to be. The clerk, Janice Winfrey, was predicting pretty abysmal turnout of like 28 to 33%. We don't have the final tally, but it seems like it's going to be, a bit more than that. I think 36 to 38% maybe, which is still down from 41% in 2018, but not bad enough to sink Democrats if they were doing well in other parts of the state. As for the other candidates, I've been talking to a lot of Republicans already this morning, trying to ask them, what they think went wrong. And a lot of folks, think Tudor Dixon actually, ended up being a pretty strong campaigner. She just didn't have the resources, right, to compete with Whitmer. She was very, very badly outspent. But Republicans I talked to anyways, more of the traditional Republican type so far this morning, said, there's no doubt they had a candidate quality issue at the top of the ticket with the Attorney General nominee, Matthew DePerno, and the Secretary of State candidate, Christina Caramo. They both made their name challenging Trump's election loss in 2020, and they won convention nominations. And at those convention nominations, it's like the diehard grassroots party loyalists. They picked candidates that were loyal to Donald Trump, not necessarily candidates that were actually capable of winning in a statewide election. I mean, you look at a lot of folks thought, Dana Nessel was the most vulnerable of the Democratic incumbents, and she still is doing quite well against DePerno. But Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, in fact, was the top vote getter amongst all Democrats at the top of the ticket. She even outperformed Whitmer, primarily because Christina Caramo never really organized much of a campaign beyond complaining about 2020. It was a grievance candidacy. She also had no money to get out her message. And when she did, it was usually in an unflattering light, right? She filed a lawsuit 2 weeks before the election trying to invalidate every absentee ballot mailed in or submitted by a drop box in Detroit. It would have invalidated, I think something like 60 to 80,000 ballots, voters that legitimately cast their ballots. And other Republicans were running away from that thing. I mean, even Matthew DePerno, who, again, made his name challenging 2020, didn't want to touch that lawsuit. He wanted to keep his distance from it. A lot of Republicans were questioning why she filed that suit. I will note that it wasn't just seeking an extraordinary remedy. It was also, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it was gobbledygook for the most part. It didn't really make any claims or present any evidence. And in a day-long evidentiary hearing, They also failed to present any sort of evidence that anything was going to go wrong in Detroit, and a judge, a Republican nominated judge, dismissed it, called it a waste of time, and said it was an irresponsible suit, and now the city of Detroit is seeking sanctions against some of those attorneys. So folks I talked to called that an unforced error by Karamo. It's one thing to challenge election security. It's another to try and invalidate a whole bunch of votes right before the election.
I have something to add to that quickly too. So the consultants I talked to, one of them actually raised a pretty interesting point, which is speaking to the candidate quality issue. He pointed to Eaton County, for example. So if you look at the election results in Eaton County, it's not that the county is not Republican. He's arguing that the Republican base is actually there. If you look at the regents, if you look at the trustees fight, I mean, those, as of last night, I haven't checked ever since, but as of last night, Republicans were leading those races. But it's not the same with the three people at the top of the ticket. I mean, the county was trending blue on the gubernatorial race, attorney general, and secretary of state. And so he seems to be arguing that, if you look at the base is actually solidly Republican, but, the top ticket candidates were being outperformed by some of those base Republicans that are like down on the ballot. And so I just thought that was an interesting thing to raise to that point.
There were some really interesting dynamics at work, I think, at the top of the ticket. One thing Jonathan had written about is that Matt DePerno, who we should say has conceded, which was a little bit of a surprise to some, Karamo is not. He was doing pretty well in polling, but if people knew who he was not.
Sorry, there's a reflection on your window.
Lauren, I'm wondering if you could. I'm wondering if people could mute, that would be fantastic. Lauren, can you talk at all about what you attribute the relatively low turnout in Detroit? That we have a question from an audience member. It was a little better than expected. Is that related at all to the candidates and the lack of candidates of color from redistricting?
Yeah, it is, it is important to note it is a midterm election. Certainly, those are always going to dip compared to presidential elections. And it does come down to, how enthusiastic voters are about the candidates that they have available. Certainly, there was a lot of, I guess, a lot of concern from Black Democrats during the primary about having Shri Tanadar win the 13th congressional district, beating out several Black candidates who are running for that position. And then at the state legislative level, I've done a lot of reporting on how the city of Detroit was split up into various legislative districts with metro communities in Oakland and Macomb counties. And that did, at least in this particular election cycle, certainly decrease the number of Black candidates that were available to voters in the general election. So it's possibly a factor. It could also just be, a midterm turnout issue. I think we'll still start to see some of the results play out over the course of the next few days once we start getting more results.
We should know too that, it does appear as though that Michigan did elect an African-American congressman in John James. Michigan also elected its first Indian American congressman in Shri Tanadar in the 13th district. This is a question for all of you. It seems as though, Jonathan, you've touched on this a little bit. Not a good night for Trump candidates. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but what does this do for the Trump movement, especially as we are on the verge of a potential presidential announcement from him?
Yeah, well, first to your point that it wasn't a great night for Trump candidates. At the top of the ticket, Tudor Dixon, Christina Caramo, Matthew DePerno, they were all endorsed by Trump, but he didn't give them much money or anything. You know, it didn't come with like a big windfall that endorsements of that kind sometimes carry with them. So it really helped them in the primary and in the GOP convention fights, but didn't seem to, be much benefit at all, if any, or maybe it even hurt them in the general election to be associated with Trump. Congressional, candidate John Gibbs, also in the 3rd congressional district, Hillary Scholten, Democrat, won there. John Gibbs was endorsed by Trump basically to take down incumbent Republican Peter Meijer, because Meijer had voted to impeach Trump for inciting the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol. So yeah, I mean, Trump also, he also endorsed some congressional Republicans who were gonna win, right? They were in easy districts. So, Bill Huizenga, Tim Walberg. So, he can count a couple wins, but in the competitive races that he endorsed in, he did really poorly in Michigan. And he did, nationwide, he didn't have a great track record last night either. And a lot of folks I've talked to here in Michigan, and then just reading the national press as well. A lot of Republicans are really excited about how Ron DeSantis did in Florida. Ron DeSantis is likely Trump's biggest, threat in a GOP primary. And Ron DeSantis cleaned up last night in Florida. He's built coalitions that the GOP wants to emulate elsewhere with Hispanic voters. Really, congressional candidates there did well riding his coattails, Ron DeSantis' coattails. So some Michigan Republican folks I've talked to today said, there's any thing to take away for presidential prospects is that DeSantis had a great day and Trump had a bad day yesterday.
For sure. Trump, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think another major indicator of, Trump not necessarily having the same amount of sway as he used to, he did post some concerns about election procedures in Detroit yesterday, and Christina Caramo was posting allegations about various election procedure issues that she was seeing without evidence, and those didn't gain traction the same way that we saw in 2020. Those were very few and far between. And, even when we see Matt DePerno coming forward and conceding the election, like those sort of election conspiracies just did not seem to have the same sway with voters. And I would say that is a reflection on Trump.
And so we think that the page is going to turn tomorrow in terms of the results, being acknowledged by most and eventually certified by the State Board of Canvassers. Are we expecting any sort of hurdles?
Well, to Lauren's point, we have not heard a formal concession from Christina Caramo, who was raising issues as recently as last evening and then went silent today, as far as I know. And, folks like former state senator Pat Colbeck ran these poll watcher operations and claim that they have material for lawsuits that they're going to be filing. Those attempts were unsuccessful in 2020. And I think without, Trump leading that effort, there's probably not going to be huge momentum for them. But I would not be surprised to see some things on that front prior to certification by the County Board of Canvassers here in the next couple of weeks.
Terrific. And Stella, can you walk us through what happens? I mean, we've all learned from 2020 that the day after the election is not the ending of the election necessarily. What has to happen until Governor Whitmer is sworn in again.
Yeah, for sure. So, so obviously the county boards will have to review the election results. There are still unofficial election results after they're all counted. And so if a county board of canvassers really can't make the decision within, I'm guessing at 40 days, help me out, my colleagues. So if that's the case, then they will have to transfer the results to the Board of State Canvassers, which ultimately has to certify the election results. And so, as we know, there are 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the Board of State Canvassers, with a Republican being chair. And so if they deadlock, then if they deadlock and fail to certify the election results, then the issue would have to go to the state Supreme Court. And eventually the Supreme Court would make the decision whether it should order them to certify the election results. So even if we get all the votes counted, it's not the end all be all.
Yeah,
Correct.
just to jump in real quick there. I Googled one of my own stories quick to double check those dates. And it looks like county canvassers are obligated to certify results by November 22. So they get a few weeks. And then the state canvassers by November 28. So by the end of this month, there should be a bow on the election.
Well, some people had expected there to be sort of a red mirage last night in which there was a dichotomy in which Republicans were going to lead in the early returns and the Democrats were going to come back, quote unquote, come back following that. That didn't seem to happen last night. Anybody speak to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think, the Secretary of State and to some extent the media was trying to prepare voters for worst case scenarios, so that we didn't have a 2020 situation happen again where people weren't understanding the process. So the Secretary of State, warned it could take up to 24 hours to count absentee ballots. And it's true, some are still being counted, but there was a wide enough margin in most of the races that publications like the Associated Press were able to call the races earlier. I think the reason we didn't have the so-called red mirage was because, as has been pretty routine in recent election cycles, Oakland County was just so fast out of the gates with their results. And Democrats did so well in Oakland County, as I mentioned earlier, that they automatically put up a big lead on the proverbial scoreboard last night. So when rural and in-person votes started coming in, it wasn't enough to ever get Tudor Dixon to the point where she was ahead in the vote tally even. So yeah, I think, credit to the Oakland County clerk. They do a consolidated absentee ballot counting board where they, basically have in one location folks counting ballots for all of the local clerks. Seems to go really well. And I mean, if you are like a diehard political junkie and want to follow election results, follow results on election night, don't go to the state website or even the AP tally first. Go to the Oakland County website, because within like 5 or 10 minutes of polls closing, they already had like 90,000 ballots tallied and up on their website, which, was only a small fraction of their total vote. But, it was far ahead of any other county in the state.
I will just quickly add to that, where we did see a little bit of a red mirage in some of these races were at the congressional level. Certainly we saw it especially in those competitive races where there were Republican challengers to Democratic incumbents like Alyssa Slotkin and Dan Kildee. We did start to see like a little bit of a lead from the Republican candidates. And then once the absentee ballots from heavily Democratic areas started coming in, or in the 7th congressional district case where there was a lot of same-day registration coming in out of Ingham County that just took a little bit more time, those races we did initially see a small lead. It was always very close, right? But for a few hours, we were seeing the Republican candidates getting that sort of in-person boost, and then the heavily Democratic areas ultimately eked out the victory for Slotkin and Kildee.
Terrific. Following up with you, Lauren, as well, or Jonathan or Stella, we've looked backward. We've talked a lot about Trump, but this is a really good day for Democrats. If you are a Democrat today, what's your agenda for the first 100 days or so in Michigan, and what are the potential pitfalls that may await the Democrats?
I think first off, this is just a ton of pressure for Democrats, right? They have been in the minority for so long, especially in the Senate, and they have been working towards trying to get a majority for the last several years, of course. But this is a big moment, not just for Michigan lawmakers, but for Governor Whitmer. She has been fighting for the last several years with a Republican-led legislature. Will she be able to get some of her marquee agenda items done with a legislature that there's a little bit of it's a slim majority, but a majority of people are at least in her party. So that's one thing I would watch out for. In terms of agenda, there are a lot of issues where Republicans in the legislature and Democrats have been diametrically opposite. I would say gun control, education. I think the abortion issue is another big example of where Republicans and Democrats have split. So we could start to see a lot of conversations on that. I think Whitmer's proposals for changing Michigan's tax structure could come up. We could see a different conversation happening about transportation and road funding. There's a lot of different directions that Democrats could go here. It just kind of remains to be seen. Where did they start? It's been a long time since they had this kind of power.
Yeah, I was talking to Ken Sikkema this morning. He was a former Senate GOP majority leader, but he was in somewhat of a similar circumstance in 1994, he told me, when Republicans got control of the House for the first time in a while, full control anyways. They had shared power for a little while before that, and had the Senate, and Engler was in office. So they had the trifecta there. He was like, it's going to take a little while for Democrats to understand, especially with a very narrow majority, putting up super controversial things. It's going to be hard to get that through still, even though they control everything, because you're going to have lawmakers in some competitive districts who don't want to go on record making a difficult vote necessarily if they have to seek re-election 2 years later. Also, he said, there's just sort of a experience gap, right? Like they have not, in the Senate, Republicans have not had control in 38 years. Ken Sikkema was like, what are you going to do? Talk to the last Democratic Senate majority leader about how to do this? Well, he's dead.
Right.
The guy before that, he's dead too. Who do Democrats turn to for advice here? Maybe Ken Sikkema would offer them some. He did offer me some this morning for how things might play.
Does anyone have a sense? I mean, do you think if you're the Democrats, then do you try to go for broke? You try to get some of your signature stuff done, or are you looking at 2024 and trying to get incremental wins? Whitmer's sort of known as a pragmatist in the party. What's your gut tell you?
I was gonna say, actually, before they have to do all the, I guess before they get to the ambition projects, one thing that they have to do is to codify the constitutional amendments that passed. And so that means, kind of amending state laws or repealing state laws if they have to make sure that everything is constitutional under Proposal 3, 2, and 1. And so I talked to Julie Brixey today a little bit. She doesn't really know exactly what would happen to those state laws that are at question, specifically by the opponents, right? The opponents to Proposal 3 have said this is going to invalidate 41 laws, including the parental consent requirements. And so that's something the state lawmakers might have to figure out, if that state law should should be at risk, if that should be if that should remain on the books, or if that should be nullified. And so the step would be for the Legislative Service Bureau to weigh in and analyze the actual impact of the proposal on state laws, and then advise the state lawmakers to make similar changes. And if there are lawsuits, brought by, say, an abortion patient who argues that the parental consent requirement is too restrictive and therefore unconstitutional, we can expect maybe lengthy court arguments over that, and a judge would ultimately have to decide the effect of the proposal. And so that's just something I wanted to add, what the state lawmakers have to consider.
Yeah, Joel, I think Democrats, they're going to want to get a couple quick wins, right? They're going to want to show voters, hey, you elected us, you gave us this trifecta, here's what we can do for you. So Gloria Woods in our chat just mentioned the pension tax. I think that's pretty low-hanging fruit. They're probably going to get a lot of Republican votes, even if they move to eliminate or exempt more senior income from taxation. And also, Gloria mentions adding LGBT protections to the state's civil rights law. Currently, that is those protections are extended under a court order. But Democrats will certainly try and codify that. They'll also try and repeal the state's 1931 abortion ban, even though Prop 3 is going to usurp that, overrule that. I was talking to State Senator Mallory McMorrow this morning, and she said if Democrats learn anything from Roe v. Wade being overturned, is that you can't count on court rulings. Or even, about proposal that could be challenged in court. So they don't want to, miss the opportunity to finally repeal that law that Democrats are probably kicking themselves. They didn't repeal, back in the 90s, early 90s, when they had control of Lansing last.
Someone mentioned, LGBTQ protections. There was a lot of talk during the debates about transgender issues, so-called naughty books in libraries. Do the results speak at all to the efficacy of that message? Are we going to be hearing more about that, you think? Or is that pretty much dead?
Well, it was a winning issue for Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, the governor's race, but didn't appear to be, a big winning issue for Tudor Dixon here in Michigan this year. She tried to emulate that, sort of building on the angst of school closures during the COVID-19 pandemic and parents just feeling like they didn't have a lot of control over things. But perhaps that's dissipating as we get further away from COVID-19. If the playbook isn't easily replicated, it's probably not going to stay in rotation for very long. That said, we haven't dug into a lot of the state, the local school board races. I'm guessing it was a pretty big issue in some of those races. We just haven't had the time to dig in there yet. I don't know, maybe Stella, maybe you have. I know you did.
I think there was a question about the Patmos Library. I believe that did fail, right? The tax.
Yeah, so Ron French, our editor and reporter, actually did that story. So yeah, I mean, in August, they defunded the library by peeling away that millage, and they just did it again. And so sure, I mean, similar sentiments still exist at the local level. I think we're just not seeing it statewide really playing out in to Republicans' benefits.
Fantastic. I know we're a little short for time. I'm just wondering whether or not round robin we can go through the reporters and talk about the big takeaways of the night. Any surprises? What we're going to be working on. Lauren.
Okay. I mean, for me, this election has been a culmination of my years of reporting on how redistricting has changed in Michigan. And I think this clearly shows what the impact of changing the redistricting process can be. And, I think a lot of people will look at Michigan and look at the results and think, whoa, this is a lot different, and it could have been a lot different had the legislature continued doing it, for example. So to me, that was, particularly in the state house results, I was really surprised to see it be that definitive, like to know the night of, or early this morning, that the House was going to go Democratic. So that was really interesting to me. And also, I think overall, just how soon we kind of knew. Like, I think we all thought it was going to be very close. It was going to come down to the wire, and it was initially pretty close. But the fact that, yeah, we can talk with a lot of authority, just about who is likely to win or who has the majority in the legislature, Wednesday early afternoon. I'm grateful, but also a little surprised, because we are still dealing with an influx of absentee voters. That process is still pretty time consuming for clerks. And we saw that there are still handling a large number of same-day registration, especially in those college towns where a lot of young people are voting for the first time. Those are still causing some delays at the ballot box. So I think as we go into the next election cycle, we'll see if some of those changes to potentially make it easier and quicker start to occur.
Terrific. Stella?
Yeah, I think much like what Lauren said, I mean, I was kind of surprised that the Democrats were going to take the House. I mean, I woke up to that and development, and I was like, wow, I thought, I was starting to like build sources with like, the rumored future House leaders who are Republicans. And I was like, wait a second, I thought Republicans were going to take the House. So that was definitely a surprise for me. And I guess another thing that I saw was just, I had expected it to be much closer, between the support and opposition for Prop 3. But it ended up, the supporters were just like, they were always ahead. And in fact, I guess it was impressive to see the margin of victory for Proposal 3 really taking over, and even bigger than the gubernatorial margin of victory for Whitmer. And so I think that was kind of an impressive thing. And as for, what's next in our coverage, obviously we're going to do more of an in-depth analysis of the election results on different races. So for example, today we're talking to campaigns and also voters about what to expect next on Proposal 3 as the state lawmakers and courts decide its final effect on state laws. We're also, I guess, like one more thing too is just how many women candidates have won and how many women voters really turned out this year. I remember when Tudor Dixon won the August primary, she said it's the year of women. I mean, she's still not wrong. This year we're seeing, according to Lauren's tally, I think if the numbers hold, women are going to be 42% of the Senate and 43% of the House, and they're going to be the majority in both Democratic caucuses, which is really interesting to see. So
Jonathan.
Yeah, as far as the results, I think as far as results, surprising results, folks have already touched on the big ones. I mean, obviously, nobody thought Democrats were going to win by this large a margin or the ballot proposals. One thing that sort of stood out to me was just the sort of glut of really bad polls that came out in the last 2 weeks before the election. The Detroit News and Free Press actually ended up, their pollsters, Epic MRA and Glenn Gariff, actually ended up pretty close to the outcome. I think Freep's last poll had Whitmer at +11. News had Whitmer at +9. She ended up at +10, so they were both very close. But I think there were a lot of more maybe Republican leaning or newer polling operations that were basically overcorrecting from 2016 and 2020 when polls seemed to overestimate Democratic participation in the election. I think they made an error going too far in the other direction. And I think that just goes to shows you like polls are less reliable. I will say that because it's just harder to reach voters now. You know, we don't have landlines anymore. Cell phones you can't robo-dial cell phones. So pollsters are having to get creative and using some unusual methods that aren't tried and tested like the way things were done in the past. So as far as what I'm working on, if you couldn't tell from our earlier conversation, I've been talking to Republicans today, trying to do sort of a post-mortem about what went wrong, where the party's headed now, and so on, because it was a tough day for them. You know, they're trying to regroup, having some come to Jesus moments, perhaps. Or maybe, you know, the direction of the party is already set in stone because of the way delegates are elected to conventions and so on. We'll see, but it's a fascinating dynamic, and I'm talking to as many folks as I can.
Absolutely. It's always fascinating. Well, I think that wraps up our portion of things. Unless you guys want final words, final thoughts, it sounds like we sort of had that already. I'm going to turn it back over to Josiah, and I really appreciate everyone coming on. This is a fantastic crowd. You guys make it worth staying up all night.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jonathan, Joel, Stella, Lauren. Thank you so much. And I want to thank also our other hosts too, Amber and Rebecca, just for having this. It's a very last minute thing. And I know you guys are running on fumes right now. I want to let you reporters get some rest, some well-deserved rest. You guys need it. I just want to let you know that this will be recorded and posted on our website or wherever you receive your Bridge news, email, Apple Watch, whatever, you can watch it on there. This is our last lunch break of the year. I want to thank you all for just coming out and supporting us, taking an hour out of your lunch just to be with us. It really means a lot. If you have any suggestions for next year for our lunch break, feel free to contact any one of us and we will be glad to listen. If you have any more questions, our reporters are glad to listen and respond back to you. You can email me, Amber, or any of our reporters if you have any more lingering questions. Thank you so much. I will see you soon in January. Have a great day.